Welcome to Crime Most French, a weekly podcast taking you through intriguing cases carried out on French soil. Researched and narrated by Cedric and rudely interrupted by me, Melanie. We're the true crime podcast All the Lions. Crack open le vin and let the mayhem commence.
The case this week is the Fualdès Affair. On the 20th of March 1817, a lifeless body is found on the banks of the Aveyron River near Rodez. We're talking southeast of France, southeast of Massif Central.
To 1817, that's kind of more than 200 years ago.
Yes. The throat of the body was cut, making it an obvious murder, although we have had cases before where the authorities maintained that a throat cut still means suicide.
Yeah, that was crazy. That was another one that was...
In fact, it wasn't that far from this one.
Yeah, it was beside a river as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, but it was in the same area.
Yeah.
The victim is well known. It's Bernardin Fualdès, a retired prosecutor.
Okay, so quite a few enemies then.
Probably. This affair is one of the most infamous of the 19th century and will be followed avidly all over Europe, making it the start of true crime magazines, and crime-obsessed press.
Okay, so 200 years later, and we found out a couple of days ago that Brian Laundrie has committed suicide, and we find out via the press that he's written a blog, some notes beside his body, and he's left a message saying that he killed his girlfriend. So here we are 200 years later and we're still all utterly obsessed with crime.
Yes. Jean-Bernardin Fualdès is notable in the area because he was a previous prosecutor under Napoleon.
Okay. That certainly dates it.
Yes. He's a convinced Bonapartist, and he has been noticed because he foiled an ultra-royalist coup in 1814, so Napoleon was still around.
Right.
It played in his favor regarding the regime, obviously, and it, unfortunately for him, created him a few enemies. On the evening of the 19th of March 1817, Fualdès is in a good mood. His friend Bastide Gramont helped him negotiate the sale of a business for 2,000 francs, that would probably be in the area of 200,000 euros, something like that today, I would think.
Oh, I would have thought would have been more than that, but that's a lot of money.
Yeah, it's a decent amount of money for a small business, yeah. He had a few money issues at the time, so that income was welcome. He could pay his debts. Various sources describe the sale as 2 bags of silver coins, Fualdès and Gramont having each kept one.
Okay.
That was Gramont's share. Or some descriptions describe a thick pile of lettres de change being the ancestor of paper money. So it was halfway between a banknote and a check. So you had to exchange it for actual money.
So it's a bit like a banker's draft then?
No, because it doesn't come from a bank.
Okay.
It is kind of a personal check, except you can't use it, you can't pay with it. You have to go and exchange it for money, and then you can spend money.
Yeah.
So it was what they had at the time to move money around easily without moving bags of money.
Checks. What kind of society would still be running with checks today? She says, rolling her eyes. The 1000th time that she's been trapped behind an old lady paying by cheque at the supermarket. France still very much runs on checks.
Either way, Fualdès comes home that evening with a lot of money.
Mm-hmm. After
dinner, Cismahu and Bergounion are 2 of Fualdès' friends, and they're used to spend the evening with him quite regularly.
Okay.
So they have dinner with him at his house. Shortly before 8, Fualdès informs them that he needs to go out. He goes to his office, collects a few things, and his valet gives him his cane and his hat. The domestic noticed that Fualdès was carrying something under his left arm and under his jacket that was creating a bulge, but he doesn't know what it was.
So likely it was a bag of money then?
It could have been a bag of money, could have been something else. We don't know. It was never found, so we have no idea.
Okay.
But according to him, he was carrying something under his jacket.
Right.
At 8:30 p.m., Marie Chasson, who's a baker, finds on her rounds the cane on on the street.
Okay.
It's obviously Fualdès' cane. When she passes the area again later at about 9 p.m., she finds a white and blue handkerchief. It's Anne Benoit's. It's been identified. The owner has been identified, who's a tenant of the Bancal family, who run some kind of rented flats in a house nearby.
Right, okay.
I don't know exactly why they knew it was hers. It must have been monogrammed or something.
Yeah.
But it was apparently, obviously hers.
Yeah. It's probably quite common for ladies to put their initials on their hankies, I would have thought.
Well, at the time, they would all have been sewing and embroidering and this kind of stuff. So, on your own stuff. I know my mum and my grandmother used to do that.
Mm-hmm.
They would sew their initials in their stuff and on their clothes. So, So that's probably how it happened.
It's just very bizarre that what time of night was this?
9 p.m.
And what time of year is it?
March. So that would have been dark, but quite dark, but not night necessarily.
But she just so happens to find.
But she's a baker, so she goes around obviously delivering things at that time.
They must have long hours.
Yeah, presumably. But now bakers still start at 3 or 4 in the morning to bake the bread that they need to sell from some 6.
It just seems strange to come across. Oh, I found a cane. Oh, I found a hanky. It just strikes me as being a bit weird.
Yeah, and the thing is, the sources are kind of difficult to find, and it's not easy to know if you can trust every detail they give.
Yes.
Because 1817, we're talking the very start of national press. We're talking no proper forensics.
No.
There's really not much to go on that we can actually be sure of.
Are the gendarmes kind of like in their infancy? Have they been established?
No, the gendarmerie was created, in fact they were called the dragons at the time. They were created in the 18th century, so a century earlier also.
Okay.
So they did exist.
Right.
But we're talking an era where science hasn't reached the police. Really, remember we had the first case that was solved using forensics, and that was early 20th century in Lyon. So
true.
And that was not 100 years later, but 75 years later. So
well, I mean, if you look at kind of murders at the same time in the UK, there was no police service, the militia were called. You know, it was Robert Peel that established a police force, and that was mid. Yeah,
but that was police, whereas the gendarmerie is army.
Yes.
So it's essentially army that keeps order in the country.
Yes.
It's not a police force. I don't know when the first police force was created in France. I have no idea. No, I can't remember. It could have been. Remember the guy who was a crook, but also became like running the police in Paris. Can't remember his name now. Could have been him. Possibly.
Oh, Vidocq.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
It could possibly have been him that created the first police force in Paris. Maybe. Would have to check. I don't know for sure. So anyway, on the 20th in the morning, so the next morning, a body is found on the banks of the river Aveyron.
Dog walker?
No, for once. Well, actually, no, I don't know. There was no description of who found the body, so I don't know.
It's always a dog walker.
Yeah, that's their job. But the body is very quickly identified. We know it's Bernardin Fualdès because he was famous in the area.
Yeah, but it's not been kind of like hidden. It's just been
no. It was just floating on the side of the river,
right,
close to the bank. So the news goes around the region very quickly, and rumors start doing the rounds, obviously, because that's what happened at the time and probably what would happen again today.
Of course.
The authorities try to identify the murderers, and the general consensus is that it is the Bancals. So the owner of the house containing rented flats nearby. Okay,
because they were close, presumably.
Because they were close, because they were known to be dodgy, because they were known to have low morals, so they were the obvious guilty party for whatever crime happened on that day.
So they looked at the wrong churchy type the wrong way and were called dodgy.
Yeah, exactly. And the cane and the handkerchief were found near the house, but that was also near a whole bunch of other houses.
Yeah.
So there was a house on the other side of the street. Yeah. It was like terrace houses, so it would have been next to the next house as well. So it's just that they were convenient being there. The Bancal family is infamous in the city because they're no-gooders. They are known to have a low sense of morality. The authorities know about them, even though they've never been really convicted of anything, but they're just like the bad neighbor that people know about. So that was the obvious family to point out.
Yeah. I think there's a big stretch from kind of like not keeping a tidy courtyard to being murderers, though.
Yeah, but at the time, probably not.
No, probably, that's very true.
The authorities don't think they could have done it alone for some reason, so they collect a number of presumed accomplices. So they go around bars or whatever, the taverns or whatever they had at the time, and say, you were in it, you were in it, you are in it, you're coming with us. That's what they do.
They didn't think that two people could murder one person.
Apparently not. They decided it wasn't likely they did it on their own.
No, okay,
They had to have someone else.
that sounds highly illogical.
I know. Then the authorities try to find sponsors for the crime, so they try to find a reason for why this family and these accomplices would have killed that guy. So they go around all the acquaintances, business partners, family, friends of Fualdès, and they settle on the brother-in-law, Gramont, the guy who helped him sell the business.
Okay.
And they also settle on a money changer, so a guy who would exchange, for example, lettres de change for money, this kind of stuff.
Okay, so like a middleman.
Called Josion, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And they are accused to having set up a trap for Fualdès the night on the 19th.
Okay.
And got some other people to kill him.
Whispered in his ear and made him go out that night rather than him just going out under his own steam.
Well, that would have been not easier to kill him in his house, really. Why would you let him go out, then kill him in the street? That makes no sense. But that's what they go for.
It seems to be that none of this makes any sense.
No, and it's going to get worse.
Oh dear.
So the authorities at the time try to investigate to prove what they are saying.
Mm-hmm.
So that will turn out to be one of the least convincing French police investigation in history. Instead of looking for evidence, they are looking for the people who would have possibly done it.
Mm-hmm.
Because as far as they're concerned, they have evidence already. They have the cane, they have the handkerchief. That's all they need to know. And then that's it. With that, they can prove what happened. They can prove the story. That's super thin. That would be laughable now. But at the time, they decided these two things prove who did it, how it was done. Now they need to just prove who ordered it.
I take it this, I think it was our last episode where you said the interrogation method that was used by the policeman who was used as an inspiration to Maigret.
Yes.
I take it the way that this case was run was not taught to future police because it just seems to be so wrong-headed.
Yes. No, it wasn't taught as the right way to do things. It's
still
very well known because of all that's going to happen, but otherwise, no, it's not taught as a good case.
No, not
but it is
all.
it is in fact over 100 years earlier than last week's case.
Yes.
So yes. So they're trying to find a good narrative that they can sell, given the evidence they have, evidence lots of their quote. And they think that for people to accept their story, they first need to make sure that it's not political, because if it's a political assassination, then that could be bad.
Well, it could be used as a martyr.
Yes, and that could have consequences, so they don't want people to think that it's that.
No, it was just pure robbery.
Yes, and they also think that a simple mugging is not enough to justify murder, so they want to find more to justify it.
Okay, so they're trying to find some kind of reason in between the two.
Yes.
Okay.
So they say it was mugging, but they say they want to show that it wasn't the motivation originally. Okay. That the mugging was just a side effect of what they wanted to do. But they certainly don't want it to be political.
No.
So they hear a rumor that Josion, one of the two acquaintances of Fualdès, apparently committed infanticide in 1809. So we're talking 10 years earlier.
Right.
Nearly 10 years earlier. And Fualdès, as a prosecutor, killed the story. So he wasn't prosecuted, he didn't go to prison, he just got away with it. So they hear that rumor and they say, oh, that's great, because then we can put that on our story and say Fualdès was silenced because he knew too much about that story. Josion didn't want it to come out, and therefore he ordered the murder. So they run with that.
I'm presuming there's no hard evidence of
No,
this
it's just a
original
rumor.
story.
And it's probably somebody inventing it, and that was it. But there's no evidence, it's hard to make it stick.
Yeah.
But it doesn't really matter anyway, because the population have their own stories.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them fed by the press, some of them created from rumors around town.
Yeah.
So they don't even care what the authorities are saying. The authorities' story is irrelevant for the population. What's interesting for them is the rumors they hear,
Yeah.
and how likely they are to be true. That's about it.
Of course.
So there's tons of rumors going around town, and at some point the authorities say, okay, we'll go with that. So instead of proving their narrative, they are trying to prove the rumors. So they changed their strategy. There's a number of things that make the story more compelling. For example, Fualdès is thought to be a Mason.
Right, okay.
So
shrouded in mystery.
Exactly. So nobody knows what happens over there. So who knows? Maybe something bad happened.
Yeah.
And also, not only the organization itself is opaque, because that's the way they do things, but also there are rumors that there was jealousy between some of the members of the lodge, and there was apparently bad blood between Fualdès and the president of the lodge.
Yeah, I think we've...
That's based on nothing.
I think we've seen that, haven't we? Where even outside life, if you're in a higher status, you can actually be a lot lower status than someone
in
else.
The Simpsons, yeah. I don't know if it's true.
Inside a lodge, yeah, as you say, we don't know if that's true
no
or
idea,
not.
no.
But yeah.
No idea.
But they're trying to spin a narrative.
But yeah, they're trying to use that. There's a number of things they try to use. And to make things even more compelling, they actually change the city. So what they do is, the city wasn't known for anything specific, but they repeat over and over again that it's a seedy city, that the area where the murder was committed was the worst part of the city. There was prostitution, there was murders and muggings happening in that area. None of that is true. None of that actually happened. But they repeat it over and over, and that sticks.
Yeah.
So after a while, that becomes the reality of the city, and people are actually talking about the city from outside as the seedy city, the city where murders happen.
Wow.
And the city stays known for that for nearly 100 years, because that's what the authorities said at the time.
Oh, I'd be suing the authorities. I mean, I bet that made your property price go plummeting.
Oh, totally. Of course, at the time it wasn't a thing to sell houses, yeah, and they actually changed the reputation of the city to justify the murder happening in that part of the city, and therefore pointing the finger at that family who was right in the center of that bad area of the bad city. So that works. In reality, the house where the couple who allegedly killed Fualdès lived is owned by a butcher,
right?
Called Vergnès, but it doesn't matter. It used to be a house where priests stayed overnight, or over a couple of nights, when they came to prepare the Sunday service in the cathedral.
All right, okay.
So that was a house where only priests stayed, and it was paid by the church. But at some point he changed that, probably to make more money, because he could have permanent tenants.
Yeah.
So he changed the house into flats instead of bedrooms, and that was it.
So
from there to the seediest part of the seediest city in the area makes absolutely no sense.
Yeah, it goes from a pious bit to a seedy bit. And
so they're probably near the cathedral. I didn't check on the map where it is, but it's probably close to the cathedral. But it makes no sense, but it worked. So on the 12th of June 1817, so 2 months later, the act of accusation is published by the tribunal.
Okay.
And it summarizes a whole bunch of witness statements, most of them made up. And that would be the basis for the trial and subsequent actions. And the story the act of accusation says is the following. At dusk, musicians were heard playing very loud in the street.
Right, okay.
Who knows? Maybe it's true, but it's just musicians.
Are these kind of like travelling minstrels just wandering around?
Don't know. The instrument is the viola, so...
The bigger violin.
Yes. So it's specific to mention the actual
That's weird.
Instrument, but nothing more. Just that they were playing and making a lot of noise. So they were playing, And the authorities say the purpose of that noise was to cover the fact that Fualdès was kidnapped in the street and then murdered. So according to them, he was gagged in the street, then dragged to the house, the bancal house.
Mm-hmm.
There he was put on the table and his throat was cut. The blood was collected into a box and it was given to a pig to eat. And the pig apparently couldn't finish the blood. That's apparently very important because everybody repeats that. And the leftovers of the blood are thrown away, presumably in the trash.
That's a totally bizarre and outlandish lie to make up.
Yeah, totally. Then the body was wrapped into a sheet. Then the sheet was wrapped into a woolen blanket.
Okay.
All that was placed on the cart. It was taken away. The cart was moved by 4 men, and they were preceded by a very tall man with a rifle, apparently.
Sounds a bit, we've wandered into Wild West territory. These guys pulling a cart and a guy at the back, kind of like scoping for people to shoot.
Yes. The scene of the crime is described mainly by the bancal children, so the children of the couple who are accused of having committed the murder. They are interrogated many times for many, many hours.
Right.
Of course, at the time, there was no limit. They didn't have an idea of what false confessions are. They had no idea of all that. So they just interrogated the kids until they got what they wanted out of them.
They didn't get their one phone call because there was no phones.
Yeah, exactly. And there was no lawyer. There was no adult.
Nothing.
There was just kids. They also collect accounts from third parties. Some of them came from the kids, so it's like people repeating what the kids told them as well outside interrogations, but also from third-party witnesses or hearsay. The kids are taken away from their parents, obviously. They're put into a foster home.
Okay, yeah.
The people running the house repeat everything the kids say to the authorities as well.
So we've got one consistent story running through.
The consistent story is the kids are asked a lot what happened. The story they say is not consistent.
Okay.
Because
it's not true.
But for a start, it's not true. But also, they were probably interrogated until they said what the authorities wanted to hear.
Yeah, definitely.
So the number of people involved increased over time, for example. So it went from our parents to 17 people who were crammed into that tiny kitchen with lots of furniture, which is not even physically possible. But it doesn't matter. So 17 people were involved in the murder in that one room. Also, there's changes in the way the guy was killed. The blood and the pig thing came at the end, but before that he was killed in different other ways. None of it made any sense. It was all invented because that's what the authorities wanted to hear. And the kids eventually said what they wanted to hear, and they went to the trial after that from that information.
Yeah, we're not leaving this room until you give us a story that we can kind of like manipulate.
Yeah, you're not leaving this room until you tell us what we want to know. We know already.
Yes.
So just tell us what we want to know.
Yeah.
And eventually they did, and that was it. That was the start of the trial.
This feels like it's going very badly.
Yes. So we go to trial. Originally, the local judge wanted to use one of the new tribunals that had been created a couple of years earlier, called the Provost Courts. They were great for prosecution because you had no jurors, you had no appeals, you had no defense of anything that you would recognize today as a defense. So essentially, people were accused, they were told they were guilty, and they were sent to death. That was what the courts were doing. It was to have very quick justice.
Is that kind of like a bench trial then? Is it the judge just hears the story and then...
It's not a bench trial because in the bench trial you have a proper defense, you have proper proof. It's still a proper trial. It's just that there's no jury. In this case, there's not even an appeal. So once you're guilty, you're guilty. That's it.
Tatties,
exactly. But that makes all the system work a lot faster.
Yeah.
So he wanted to use that, but the prefect said, no. We need a proper court. It needs to be done properly so we can actually say these people were guilty. So there's negotiation for a while, and after a while, it's agreed that the tribunal would be a normal criminal tribunal, but it would take place in the city where the murder took place, which the prefect didn't want, because he said the jurors are going to be his neighbors. The jurors are going to be the people who accuse him, or accuse the couple of having killed that guy.
Yeah.
It makes no sense, but it will take place in that city anyway.
Right.
So the first trial, because there were several, takes place from the 18th of of August 1817 to the 13th of September 1817.
That's quite long.
It is a month, yeah, it is very long. There are 11 people on the bench, all accused of varying degrees of involvement in the murder. There are 243 witnesses called for the prosecution, 77 for defense.
Wow.
Which is totally insane for a murder that happened in a tiny kitchen.
So, yeah, I mean, it must have been people were just coming by an open door.
Yeah, what's insane is that however many people were involved in that murder, that led to nearly 300 people knowing about it to some extent, which is crazy.
Yes.
If you killed someone, you're not going to tell other people.
No.
Not 300 people anyway.
No, I mean, there's a limit to, how much third-party involvement you need to hear from. In a court environment, I would think it would be nil.
Yeah, but you need witnesses if they've seen the murder.
Yeah, but that's not third
that
party. I mean, it seems to be that these are all third party.
Some of them are just there because they've heard a rumor.
Yeah.
And they just repeat the rumor.
I mean, it's just ridiculous.
Yeah. At the end of the trial, the sentence is 4 people are sentenced to death, 2 to life in prison, and 1 to 1 year in prison.
I haven't heard anything as crazy as that, and the whole thing, the whole number of episodes we've done. That is just insane.
Yes. But it doesn't matter because the sentence is broken for technicality.
Okay.
The court clerks would have made a mistake somehow. I couldn't find out what exactly it was. Yeah. I suspect it's the prefect pulling strings in the background to try to cancel that trial he didn't want. But then the second trial will happen in Albi, which is a big city nearby.
Okay, so
and that's where the prefect wanted the trial to take place, which is
away
from that city.
Got his own way eventually.
He got his way eventually, yes. So that takes place between 25th of March 1818 and the 5th of May 1818. So a lot shorter than the first one, about 2 weeks. During the trial, there's a new witness, a very important witness called Clarisse Monson.
Oh, right, okay.
And she's the daughter of a local judge. So she's above suspicion. She can't lie. She has to tell the truth.
And she just happened to be there, did she?
But she just happens to know what happened in the murder. But her testimony during the trial confuses everyone because 1 minute she was a witness to the murder. She saw everything. She described what happened. The next minute she had nothing to do with it. She's never heard of these people. She wasn't there. And she just goes from one to the other constantly.
So basically, 1 minute she's a liar and the next minute she's not credible.
Yeah, essentially, yeah. Yes. So...
But as you say, judge's daughter,
exactly.
Above suspicion.
Exactly. So what the prosecution does is they keep the bits of what she says that are interesting to them and ignore everything else. Yeah. And that seems to work.
I wonder if this is, I mean, I know that you're saying this is kind of like the first case that has kind of like gained a lot of notoriety. I wonder if this is indicative of how cases were run at the time. Just seems insane.
To a certain extent, probably, yes. Yeah, it's likely that it was the... One thing that Napoleon did was create the Napoleonic Code, and that codifies how things should be done. And
I think that's still in...
It's still in place in France and in Germany, at least, and probably Spain as well. Most of the criminal code is the Napoleonic Code. So he kind of codified how things should happen. So these kind of weird trials should have happened a lot less after that. Before Napoleon, it was probably fairly common, these kind of trials. Yeah. Because, of course, because you have no forensics, no nothing, you have to go with what people say. And if people say crazy things, you go with crazy things. And people are condemned to death, most likely, on nothing. But with the Napoleonic Code, you have to follow a certain structure for the trial. The tribunals work in a certain way. There's people doing some things. You're allowed appeal and this kind of stuff. So it is a bit better, but it probably was very common at the time, these weird kangaroo trials. So also Clarisse Monson has whole theatrics going around, so she faints and goes hysterical and all that as she's talking about what she's seen or not.
She's been watching too many drama, too many drag queens.
Yeah, exactly. So during the trial, there are 8 people accused. So we went down from 11 to 8.
A much more manageable 8.
Yeah, but there are 350 witnesses. So still an insane number of witnesses. It
That is
went up
just insane.
compared to the first trial.
That's virtually the whole. I mean, and that's like 3 times the size of our village.
Yes.
That's just ludicrous.
Yeah. Also, to make things even more confusing, some of the accused cannot confess having done it.
Well, yeah, they would do. We know you will confess to anything.
Yeah,
if
eventually, yes.
you're sleep deprived.
Yeah, exactly. If it drags on long enough, you'll
Yeah.
confess to anything. So obviously, some of them did.
Yeah.
So in the end, the second trial, 2 of the 4 sentenced to death have their sentence confirmed.
Right.
The Bancal wife has her sentence commuted to life in prison instead of death.
Okay.
Anne Benoit of the handkerchief gets life of hard labor. 2 are sentenced to 2 years in prison, some of their accomplices.
Yeah.
And the 2 that are sentenced to death are executed on the 3rd of June 1818. So
they
they're
didn't
not
waste
wasting
any time. That
No,
is
they're
just
taking
heartbreaking.
less than a month to execute them.
Utterly heartbreaking. You're not telling me these men were actually...
Oh, no, most likely not. And obviously they didn't
Guilty.
have an appeal because there's no way the appeal ran between early May and early June. So they obviously either didn't have defense or they were badly advised or whatever, but they obviously didn't appeal and they were allowed to appeal.
And if you drop your hanky in the street.
Yes. There's a 3rd trial, which also takes place in Albi.
I'm sorry, there's a 3rd trial. There's 2 people already dead. I mean, that's just slightly after the fact.
It's for 3 more accomplices that somehow have been identified. But all are freed. So they're not sentenced to anything.
What a waste of time and money.
Yeah. In the end, sadly, we don't really know what happened.
No.
The various trials were just a joke. And they are seen now as one of the worst miscarriages of justice in history.
Yes.
Most likely all those who were executed or sent to jail for life or to hard labor were totally innocent, had nothing to do with what happened to Fualdès. But the truth is that the justice at the time wasn't after finding the people who were guilty.
No.
They were after finding someone serviceable as a murderer.
Yeah, just
so that
clearing
they could
the case.
explain what happened and move on.
Exactly.
Beyond money motives, there are several theories that have been going around over time, but the 2 that have stuck as the most likely to be kind of based on something believable are, the first one is Fualdès' son, during the first trial, provided letters, unfortunately unsigned, so we don't really know if they were made up or not, that state that Fualdès was killed because of the escape of Louis XVII from the temple prison and his survival. Louis XVII was the Dauphin. He was Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette's son.
Oh, right, yes.
He was in jail with them in the temple,
Mm-hmm.
which is just one of the prisons in Paris. Officially, he died at age 10 on the 12th of June 1795 in prison because of health issues. But there's been rumors until now that the boy that they found dead was not him. It had been swapped.
Yeah.
And Louis XVII escaped and survived.
Of course. You don't need, much like Anastasia from the Romanov family.
Yeah, same thing.
If it's easy to twist a wee story. And as we know, they eventually found Anastasia's body. So
yeah, but for over nearly 100 years, people were pretending to be her.
Yes.
And
crazy.
Same thing. It's
crazy.
It's you can imagine that maybe it did happen, and therefore it happened, and people try to find.
Yes. Wouldn't it have been great if he escaped?
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
The reason why Fualdès is involved in that is that his dad, who was also a prosecutor during the Revolution and under Napoleon, had been involved in lots of cases around that.
Okay.
And he was known to be quite knowledgeable about what happened to the Dauphin.
So he knew where the Dauphin was.
Yes. So the story is Fualdès was killed because he had access to proof from his dad of what actually happened.
That dude has a lot of... he's got a lot of things buried. He knows he's got stories on everyone.
Exactly. And that's why he's dead.
Mm.
The reason why it's important is Louis XVIII, who was on the throne at the time, was Louis XVII's uncle. And if so Louis XVII wasn't dead,
he would have been dethroned.
Was an usurper. He should not be on the throne.
Mm.
So the story is, because he knew that Louis XVII wasn't dead and probably knew where he was, the authorities, the state, the monarchy, killed him because they didn't want the story to come out, so that Louis XVIII could stay on the throne. So that's one of the theories.
So that's much more likely than someone finding out this dude just had made a deal and had a lot of money on him and was simply robbed.
Yes. Yeah. So if you go with the fact that Louis XVII survived, the story is believable.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Uh-huh.
I thought the problem
Right.
is even the death certificate of Louis XVII no longer exists. It was burnt during various revolutions in Paris.
Well, of course.
So we can't even see how it was
how he
described
died.
or what information there was in it.
Yeah, I doubt that. I suspect it wouldn't have told us anything important anyway.
Never know. On some death certificates, they explain how the person died.
Yeah,
So
but
it could be that there would have been information. It could have said, "Oh, he died of TB," and
uh-huh.
that could have been checked, for example, because that leaves traces on the bones.
Oh yes, of course.
Or other things, maybe. But because we don't know, we have no way to know what was on that death certificate. We only know when it happened, the date. That's
Fair
it.
enough.
That's the end of the story as far as we can go.
Fair enough, but it is very far-fetched.
It's far-fetched, yeah. It's not likely to have happened. He just died in prison.
Yes.
That's probably what happened.
Yeah.
But it wasn't uncommon for people to leave prison just by paying the guards
Yeah.
at the time. Or get a nice flat in the prison by just paying.
Yeah.
Because at the time you were paying for your stay in prison, unlike now. So if you could pay a lot of money, you had a nice cell or even essentially a flat.
Was it Molière that was writing from prison?
Oh, lots of them. No, don't think Molière did. No, Molière wasn't. He was a valet, so he wasn't in prison.
Who was it that was writing from prison?
Sade was writing from prison.
Could be.
Voltaire did at some point as well.
I think it's Voltaire. I'm thinking.
A few of them did. So at the time, it wasn't unlikely that if you had money, you could pay and just leave.
Yeah.
So maybe somebody paid and Louis XVII left. Who knows? We don't know. But anyway, that's one of the theories. Another one appeared in 2003.
Wow, it's a lot later. It's almost 200 years later.
Yes, and the story is that it was an underground religious group called les Chevaliers de la Foi, so the Faith Knights,
Okay.
who targeted Fualdès as a symbol for his central role in the failure of the coup in 1814
Right.
that he managed to foil because he knew things going on.
Because yes, he had information.
Because he had information, and that's true. We know that. That's for sure. He foiled a coup in 1814.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that is true.
Mm-hmm.
So the story is that there was a underground religious group that wanted to make an example of him because he made the coup impossible. And also he was Bonapartist, and of course all the religious groups at the time were monarchist, so not really compatible. The idea for that explanation was first floated by the prefect at the time of the trial.
Right, okay.
And it was the Baron Trémont, who was at the time known for having a lot of knowledge of religious and underground religious groups.
Okay.
So we have no proof, but it's not crazy that he had heard that was going on, and that was the reason why he was killed.
Slightly more plausible than the Dauphin story.
Way more plausible than Dauphin surviving, because there were tons of religious groups at the time. There had been persecution during the revolution in some areas, especially against specific groups around the country. So it's very possible that one of those groups, having had their plans messed up by a guy who politically was naturally their enemy, decided to kill him. That's totally believable.
Yeah.
Of course, we have no proof again.
No.
All we have is that guy at the time saying that he had heard that it was going on and that was them. That's pretty much it.
Yeah.
And that was probably found in archives somewhere in letters or whatever. But he doesn't provide proof, of course.
No.
So we still don't know.
From this distance, it's very difficult to provide proof.
Unfortunately, that's as far as we can know exactly what happened, because a lot of the documentation from the time disappeared during the various revolutions that followed in 1830, 1848, 1831, 1871. So a lot of the information that we could have possibly looked at to try to explain the case is gone. So why is that story so important? It is important because it coincides with the creation of a national press in France. So before that, you had your local or super local newspaper, like in your town. from about that point, you have national newspapers, so papers that go around the whole country. So it means that stories that take place in Albi or anywhere, or Rodez, would have been known in Paris, would have been known in Brittany, would have been known in completely different parts of the country.
Yeah.
So that means that small stories suddenly become big stories, and people read those stories.
Yeah.
And it also matches with the democratization, I guess, the spread of presses that could print lithographs.
Oh, right, yes. So you can get pictures along with
exactly. So it was not just text, which was a bit to read. It was actually text with pictures, and it was a lot more appealing to people. So they were actually paying attention and reading the stories.
Yeah.
Also, because the printing press was a lot more common and a lot cheaper, you actually had people on their own publishing information. So, for example, one of the lawyers during the first trial was publishing pamphlets every single day, explaining everything that happened during the trial, copying whole dialogues, and essentially he was a court reporter.
Okay, yeah.
Because he could. He had a press, and he could just print it and distribute it.
Yeah.
That was totally new. That never happened before. And of course, when you have that, the national newspapers can use it and then amplify it, and it goes around. And because lots of European countries got national presses at the same time, then it spread over the whole of Europe. So it was apparently known to be followed in Austria, in Germany, and even all the way to Moscow, for example.
Wow.
It was a true crime story that everybody wanted to know about. They wanted to follow the story. They wanted to know who did what. And they wanted to know what the people looked like. They wanted to know what the area looked like. And they got all that because of lithographs and the descriptions in the newspapers and in the pamphlets.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
So that's why it became the first true crime story, because it was suddenly the first story it was possible to become a true crime story, a global true crime story.
Yeah.
So that's why it's an important story. The fact that it was totally made up and the wrong people were convicted is not totally new. There's been probably tons of those, but they weren't known at the time, so nobody would really follow that story. And that's it, really.
That's it. And I think, sadly, as you said, trying to change the nature of reality to make it fit your story can have horribly deadly consequences.
And it still happens today.
Yeah, that's even more depressing.
Yes.
And on that cheery note,